Anyway, thank you for being here. Let me pray, and then we'll get started. Lord, thank you for this day and for your faithfulness and blessings. We just sang about that. Thank you for coming and meeting our needs and seeing our needs and seeing that we're worth rescuing. And so we thank you for that. And I just pray you speak through me today. In your holy name, amen. So I had a message planned, and we're not going to do that. So you have been here when I didn't have notes. So that's not this. Well, I don't have notes, but it's for a different reason. I just have been feeling kind of a tear. So we're going to take a step away from our series and do this today, and hopefully it works. We're heading to the holidays, right? Which is great. It's a great time to celebrate, to just pause. We spend a lot of time talking about the importance of remembering and putting space in our lives to remember what God has done. And so we have a rock for when we launched and our first birthday and our first baptisms and moving into this space. And these are kind of just some of the things we wanted to remind us, to have reminders of these things that also remind us of other things that God has done in and through Bluffs. And so it's, I don't know if I was in the hallway when Michelle introduced everyone. If Molly, I don't know if she talked about Molly. So when we launched, as churches do when they're launching, they'll have practice services. So we met at the Pump House downtown. Some of you have never had a service down there with us, so that's kind of weird that we've been here long enough that some of you don't know that. But we were mobile for most of our history. And so churches have the practice services before they launch. And so we set up, we had a launch team, Meg and Deborah on that. They tell you when you're preparing to launch, like you're going to get a launch team, and within a year, most of those people who have said, I'm with you to the end, they'll be gone. That has been the case, except for Meg and Deb, so thank you so much for sticking out. Jack came along shortly after that, but wasn't part of the original group, so you don't get the same applause or appreciation. So we appreciate you, but just a little bit less. Just kidding. No, but they were there from the beginning. We put on these 3 launch services, and then we had our first service, and it was awesome. Well, we had just in December had to find a new worship leader, and so Jared joined our team. So if you knew him, he was our worship leader for a year and a half. But because we didn't have any idea how to do tech, we asked Molly to come, who I worked with for 3 years, I think, years ago, to come and lead worship for the first couple weeks so Jared could kind of figure out how tech worked and train our tech team and all that. So to have Molly back up here is just a blessing. And of course, I've known Kristen a long time. And so we work together and all that. It's really neat to be here. And we're very grateful. So the text that comes to mind, we're heading to the holidays, back to that. They're great, but sometimes they're complicated, right? Like sometimes it's painful. We know that, not to get dark, but like suicide attempts go up. Purchase of drugs and alcohol, all that kind of stuff goes up this time of year. It can be it's literally dark outside and can emotionally be very dark, right? It's a hard time. And sometimes people are alone or they're not connected to their family, so they have kind of no one to belong to. We were talking just last night how I grew up in Michigan and have spent most of my life away from Michigan now, but every once in a while, there's this wave of longing to kind of go back home. Home for me is where Michelle is, so that's home. Everyone say, aw, yeah, thank you. And that's just true, and I don't apologize for that. And we've moved around a little bit. Most of our time was in the Twin Cities. And there's no family living in the town where I got. My whole family is from, both sides of my family from West Michigan, Grand Rapids area, and almost everyone is still in that area. But we moved when I was 4-ish, to Charlevoix, where I grew up, and I kind of basically moved away after graduating, and that's it. And so sometimes I kind of miss that. We miss home. We miss kind of these kind of places where we feel grounded, right? But some people at the holidays don't have that place, and it can be hard. And so when we head to things like Thanksgiving, it gets complicated. For us personally, we were at this point 4 years ago. We had all gotten COVID. My mother-in-law had been in the hospital, and we were talking about her coming home. We were planning what we're going to eat. Abby Harder, are you here? Her family is from near where my in-laws were living, and so they were going to get food for us. Like, what kind of pie do you want? All this stuff. We're going to go up and have Thanksgiving, and then all of a sudden, a dark turn, and a couple of days after Thanksgiving, my mother-in-law passed away. So as we head into Thanksgiving, it's very much connected to the loss of Michelle's mom. So there's thankfulness, and there's a lot of sadness, right? And that's how a lot of us feel about these times of year. And yet 1 Thessalonians 5 at the end, as Paul's wrapping up this letter, he says weird things like, rejoice always, pray without ceasing. And then he says, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Give thanks in all seasons. Like all seasons, or maybe most seasons, or a lot of seasons, or like the good seasons, right? No, in all seasons. Now, this kind of passage has created a lot of anxiety for a lot of people in our spiritual life. Like, you're saying, tell me to pray without ceasing. So I need to pray all the time. So, like, how do I order food if I'm praying at the same time without freaking out the waitress, right? Like, so that's not what he means, right? So what does it mean? So this created a lot of like spiritual pressure and like tension and disappointment. Well, I can't do that, so why bother trying? And how do I give thanks in all seasons? I was reading this morning, and I'm reading in Mark, chapter 5, and there's 3 stories. You can turn there if you want to. There's 3 stories in chapter 5 of Mark that are just great stories, and I'm going to kind of tell them in reverse order. So one might be a story of, it says a ruler, and he has a daughter, and perhaps someday people are over, and it's like, I noticed that you hug your daughter along, like you seem to be very close to your daughter, and seem to be very protective maybe of your daughter. Tell me about that. Well, she died once, but then Jesus healed her, and now we look at our daughter differently. Right? We're more grateful for our daughter than we were. Maybe that's what happened in that person's life. We had a time, sorry, Isaac, quick story about you. When we were camping, you've heard the story, we were camping in northern Wisconsin, right on the border of the UP in Wisconsin. We were with the family, and Isaac, biting bugs love him, so they just attack. And so like his white t-shirt, he's like 10 or 12, 10 maybe, just red spots of these biting flies. I mean, sometimes the biting flies are like, did you get crossbred with a bat? Like, just massive thing come down. Red spots. We're with the family, with a bunch of kids. He had kind of had his fill of these kids, and we were packed up. We're going to go on one last hike with this family. He walks ahead. We thought the trail was going to dead end at a beach. It didn't. He just kept following the trail and was lost in northern Wisconsin for a couple hours. So guaranteed, as soon as we found him, we're like, what do you want to eat? Anything you want, as much ice cream, as many hot dogs, whatever. Like, you just feel a little differently. You tell this story. We're not thankful that he was lost, but getting him back kind of changed things a little bit, right? So thankful in all seasons, in all circumstances. I imagine this ruler felt this way a little bit. I'm not glad that my daughter died. I'm so grateful Jesus was there and Jesus healed her, right? Resurrected. So I'm thankful for this situation. The story just before that is about this woman that had this issue of blood, which we know even today, many parts of the world don't have basic resources or teaching on feminine hygiene. Like the conversations that moms have with their daughters all across the country on a daily basis. This is what's happening. This is how you, whatever. There isn't that, and there wasn't that. And so even today in parts of the world, that leads to a week or two where women can't work because they're shamed. They're outcast. And if you are the provider for your family, that means your family starves, right? Shame is a huge, one of the things I was going to talk about today, and we'll talk about it next week, is that Israel is a shame-honor culture. We're a guilt-based culture. They're very different. And no one is any one thing. We're all a little bit of a mix, but they are predominantly a shame-based culture. So when you are bringing shame on your family or your village or your community, you are outcast, and that's even part of the law, right? When these things are happening, you had to leave the camp. Well, this resulted in years of shame for her. And then she sees Jesus, and she touches him, and she's healed. Now, I can imagine she didn't say, I'm super grateful for all those years of torment, but I can also imagine her saying, thanks. Thanks, Jesus. You healed me. We just sang songs like, there's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground. These songs are meaningless unless I'm dehydrated or starving, right? I have a cupboard full of food, but then you gave me manna. Right? Like, that's not an interesting story. These are stories of rescue. I needed sustenance, and you provided sustenance. I was desperate, and you provided. Thanks for that. So our thankfulness is connected to our need and our pain, right? The overlap. So as we head into these holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and all the other things that connected, and we can debate about, well, Jesus was born in the spring and all that, whatever. Like, as we're heading into these things, and you're going to watch the National Geographic specials, and they're going to say, they found a lost gospel, and it turns out it's all a hoax. No. As we head into these holidays, we're going to feel this. Sometimes we have family, but being around family is really hard. And so you're like, gosh, I kind of wish I didn't have family, right? We've had those experiences. This is hard. Or we have those times where I'm going to go spend X amount of days with family, and turns out one day less is the sweet spot, right? So we're trying to figure that out. So we have a place to go, and even then it's still painful. All these things we sang about, sweetness at the mercy seat. That's meaningless unless I acknowledge that I need mercy. And I do. And so do you. So thanks. Thanks for seeing me in my sinfulness and being merciful. That's what gives meaning to it. That gives what gives need for it. It's what gives meaning to it. The story before this woman that is healed of her issue of blood is one of Michelle's, maybe her favorite story, certainly one of hers. It's always a little awkward for me because she heard this story unpacked by another preacher, and when she talks about it, it sounds a little crushy. I'm like, dude, like, he wasn't that great. Like, I feel a little threatened. The story going backwards was when when the riots happened that resulted in the temple being destroyed in the 60s, 70s AD. At that time, Rome really didn't differentiate between Jews and Christians. Christianity was just a sect, like a version of Judaism. And we have different kind of versions, kind of denominations. There's the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and that kind of thing. We talked about the Hillel and Shammai school last week. I know you guys hang on every word I say, so remember all that. Thank you, Austin, for confirming that. So so there were different schools of thought, and they would kind of feel a little bit like denominations might feel today. And so the Romans saw the Jews and Christians as just two different denominations of the same thing. And so the Christians were getting blamed, kind of heaped in with the Jews that were revolting. And so some of them fled. And one of the towns they fled to was a town called Pella. You've been to Pella, Iowa. It's a big Dutch Reformed community named after this. So it was a safe haven because there were a lot of Christians there. So they went out and that's where they kind of hid. But before that, there was a guy who got healed by Jesus. And Jesus crossed the river, across the sea, just to go to this place. It was a place where good Jews, good rabbis wouldn't be seen. And this guy is tormented by demons, and he's just outcast. He's chained. He hangs around with tombs. So he's in a cemetery, and he's unclothed. He's just tormented by the demons, and certainly not looked upon well by the locals, right? This is the town freak, the town outcast. And Jesus crosses the sea and heals him. And of course, this is the only person that's ever maybe loved him, seen him as a person, seen him as valuable. Aside from maybe kids going to throw rocks at him, which you can imagine possibly happening, just like we have, like most of us grew up and there's the one house on the street where the witch lives, right? There's like the creepy house. Most of us have families in our town or neighborhood, whether that's the family, it's okay to kind of speak ill of. They're the whatevers. This was that guy. And Jesus crosses the sea to see him. And who does that? I'm going to go see the most difficult, ugly, uncomfortable, inhospitable person. I'm going to go out of my way to do that. And Jesus does that. He crosses the sea, and he heals him. And of course, this guy's like, let me go with you. No, of course he wants to be with Jesus. No one else has ever treated him that way, right? Instead, he says, no, I want you to go talk about what happened. And that leads to revival, which later on, fast forward to 3 decades, creates a safe haven for Christians to escape riot. Was he thankful that he was demon-possessed and lived among tombs? Probably not. Was he thankful that he was rescued and seen by Jesus and then used by Jesus to build his kingdom? Absolutely. Would one have happened without the other? Probably not. So thanks, Jesus. Does that mean Jesus had him demon-possessed so that he could go through that? No, I don't think that. Does that mean that Jesus can and does redeem anything he wants to and use it for his glory? Absolutely. Jesus uses that pain, that hurt, that disappointment, all that stuff, the shaming, to bring glory. There were many people that were well-to-do and had it together who didn't make it into Mark's gospel, but the woman with the issue of blood does. Let me tell you about someone. This lady figured it out. She didn't let the shame from others keep her from touching Jesus, reaching out to Jesus. And that inspires me when I don't feel like reaching out to Jesus, when I'm just going to kind of deal with my sin on my own and kind of let the dust settle and pass, or whatever is keeping me from him, whatever is dividing me from him. I see stories like this woman who, despite all of that, reaches out and touches Jesus. So since 2000, when my mother-in-law passed, we have lost 4 grandparents between the 2 of us, Michelle and I. And they were all very old, and so there's a, not to say that it doesn't matter, but there's a timeline and it makes sense and it was okay. I think, Dad, your mom was 98, right? My grandma Smith died first, she was 94, and then a year later, my mom's dad died, and then almost a year later, my mom's mom died, and then almost a year later, Michelle's grandma died. So it was sad, right? At my grandma Smith's funeral, I've stolen this before, and I'm going to steal it again. I got to speak at both my grandmas. They're Catholic, and so me as a Protestant pastor getting to speak there was kind of a big deal. It was quite an honor. This is back to this 1 Thessalonians, in all things, all circumstances, give thanks. This priest gets up and he's talking about my grandma, and he reads this passage, and I'm like, when are you going to do this? Just curious. Kind of as a grieving grandson and as a pastor. He said, my grandma's name was Mary, and she was a widow for about 40 years, and was she was just vibrant. Bright blue eyes, active. She could walk my dad into the ground. She was, the one taking swing dancing lessons at 60, and just, she's 80, and the 65-year-old guys are hitting on her because she's just full of energy, right? Like she was that girl still. And so my grandma was the hottie around the So, um, so at this funeral, there was two priests. One was the young one was like 70. The older one was probably pushing 90 himself. And he starts talking about my grandma, and he said things like this: "Father, we miss Mary. We're sad, but Mary served in our kitchen, and she fed us for 25 years. We got to benefit from her servant's heart." And she fed so many of us and helped us experience community, because hospitality is one of your values. So thanks. Thanks for Mary. Lord, we're sad. We miss Mary. We're grieving. But she sang in our choir, and so we got to listen to her voice. For 30 years she sang in this choir. We were blessed by her ministry as you worked through her in song, so thanks. And he kind of just did this. And so many of us have pain, right? We have things that hurt us, things that we've done, things that other people have done. We have broken relationships. We have any number of things, disappointments. And I would never encourage you to put on Pollyanna glasses. You can look that up later if you don't know what I'm talking about. Don't fake it. At the same time, and we weren't faking it with my grandma Smith. Like, we were sad. She was 94 and she had had dementia, and it was time, and so we were also relieved for her. So there's a weird thing of like, we're thankful that her suffering is gone, right? So there's this weird mix of feelings. But can we see, maybe looking back, Lord, I was starving. Thanks for the manna. I was lost and lonely, and thanks for my friends. I didn't know what to do, and I found a church where people loved me. With the church we came from, I told the story. There was a woman who, she was young. She had a kid, single mom, no dad in the picture, all this stuff, and she was looking for a church. And we were able to say, hey, we think you can come here, and people aren't going to judge you. Like, this is going to be a safe place. Being able to say that about a church is not something maybe I always would have said, and certainly not every church I attended. Being able to say that about that church or this church, like, thanks, God. I know some of your stories, and I know that there's some pain there. There's some regret. There's some confusion about the future. I'm so thankful you're here. Right? I'm so thankful I get to walk through that shadow with you. Like, we'll figure it out. As we head into the holidays, can we not pretend that we're not hurt or not sad? I don't think Jesus asked us to do that. But can we say, Lord, help me to see what you're doing in and through this. And help me to give that to you so you can work through that. And so that maybe someday you can be like, let me tell you about my daughter. Let me tell you, I was sick, and I was ashamed, and I was discarded, but Jesus healed me. He didn't even, I healed myself through Jesus. Like, this woman just reaches out, like, just hoping. And sometimes that's what it's like, right? We're just desperate. Like, I don't even know if this is the right way to do it. Don't worry about it. I talk to people all the time, like, I don't know how to pray. Don't worry about it. Just talk. Or don't. Just sit with them. Just abide, right, ladies? Right? So there's ways, he just wants your heart. Just trust him a little bit, a little bit, a mustard seed. And so we come to him and we can come to him in our plenty, is for sure, but can we come to him in that place of need? We had Teen Challenge here a few weeks ago, and when we hear these women tell their stories, especially those who have graduated and moved on, they're maybe not glad for all the hurt from the past, but when they can see the difference Jesus makes, they're like, thanks. Thank you for that. So our need sometimes helps us to see what Jesus can do and does, and the fact is, that's why he came. We have to remember that. So that part of your life that feels desperate or hopeless or lost, he likes that stuff, right? Let's figure it out. Let's work it out. Let's find hope there. Let's find redemption there. Let's find reconciliation there. And then we can look back and say, thanks. Thanks, God. Worship team, if you want to come up. We all have stories. Oh, and here's your music back. Sorry about that. We all have stories and we all have pain, and we are going to. Life is hard. It is hard. There are beautiful and incredible moments that can just knock your socks off. And there are painful moments that can take your breath away. I haven't had the wind knocked out of me in a long time. No, I'm not asking for help with that. But I remember the feeling like you just can't breathe, and you feel like you're never going to breathe again. You panic, and it gets worse, right? We've all had those moments where I can't see any possible positive outlet. I can't see how this could work. Where I met these two, I worked at the university for a long time, and it didn't end well. It was a pretty painful ending. And I had to work through a lot of stuff with that. But I met some incredible people. Josh and Letitia there. My son went there. Met Dave there. We knew Esther before, but she went there. I met these guys. If I'm forgetting anyone, I apologize. So even though there's pain, I'm like, thanks. For some incredible years. Some incredible things that we got to be a part of. Does it hurt? Sure does. Still does. But thanks. When we get to do ministry together, thanks, God. It's where I met my wife. I wasn't going to go to that school. I was going to go to school in Florida. And then the first time I felt like, which now seems like a great idea, right? I had a roommate all set up, and like a typical young adult, my mom did all the paperwork, because that's what we do. I'm a grown-up. I don't know what this means. And then you go to school and you keep getting these emails about, or not emails then, but in mail in the mailbox about you owe money. Like, I don't know what that means, so if I don't touch it, it's not real, right? And then I was praying, and I felt like God said, you should go to North Central. So I did. And it was not easy for me as a student. I think I went through depression. It was a very dark time. But I met some incredible people, my wife included. So thanks. Thanks for proving yourself faithful. Thanks for proving yourself present. He's not ashamed of you, right? We've all got that thing that we're ashamed of, that we wish wasn't true, that we hope other people don't find out about, or maybe a small group of people. He's not ashamed of you. Like, can you get your head around that? Like, think about that. Think about the thing that you want, that you hold closest, that secret that you don't want people to know, the thing that you're most ashamed of or embarrassed of, and he's just not. He's like, let's fix that, right? And let's use it. Yeah, I was naked. I was chained in the tombs, and kids came and threw rocks at me, and the people they just came out and mocked me, and no one would visit me. No one loved me. Then Jesus came across the sea, and he healed me, and then he said, go and tell the story. The story's only relevant because he was a demoniac entombed. The story's only relevant, it's only meaningful because you were starving, and then he fed you, and then used that to glorify himself, to build his kingdom, so other people can say thanks. So as we sing this last song, just give that thing to him. Invite him into it. He wants to use it. Do we miss my mother-in-law? Absolutely. Does this fall bring it up? We just celebrated her birthday. But thanks. All those 5 people that I named, incredible, like centuries of faith and faithfulness represented in our grandparents and my mother-in-law. Wow. Thanks. Thanks for that, God. Is it painful? Sure. Is it sad? Sure. Is it wonderful? Absolutely. So let's just give those things to him and invite him in. We don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. He doesn't want that. But let's give it to him and see what he wants to do with that.